But I hope that that really does help all of you understand better the appointed times. Now remember, this is an intro. I didn't break down every single one of them in every single detail, but enough that you should know who, what, when, where, why, and all of that stuff, and how, okay?
Thank you, Rabbi Steve. This was, for me, the clearest and simplest teaching I've ever heard on the Moedim. And I feel really inspired to be even more diligent about preparing ahead. I'm starting to get in the swing of it after 4 years.
Amen.
But it's really exciting. I find, too, just one comment, I find that in the past 4 years that I've been doing the feasts, sometimes the feasts have fallen during a season when I am really struggling, either emotionally or with rebellion of some sort or a besetting sin or fault. And I have found that consistently, because he knows my heart, he has somehow worked in my life or brought about circumstances to get me where I need to be by the time that feast happens. It has just been amazing.
Amen.
And I would like to also comment on the Shabbat. The Shabbat being the highest of the set-apart days of Yahweh and happening weekly, every single week, 52 times a year. I find that Shabbat is the most challenging to master of the feasts. It is, to me, Father's way of continually, only one of the functions is to prepare me for the other feasts by working through the struggles about Shabbat. And I wonder if you would comment. You and I have had some conversations about what I'm about to bring up in the past, but for the benefit, some of us are retirees. Some of us, we don't have to think about getting time off from work for Shabbat, or maybe we need to take time off from any volunteer efforts
Some of us don't get time off on Shabbat.
Right. But I find that the more the more you're in ministry, you have to redefine rest.
I will.
You really, you have to, we have to redefine rest because we tend to think this is a time for me to just let my body kind of, sit in the spa. But the rest does come, the refreshing does come. Now here is a couple of specifics. In Orthodox Judaism, is it not correct? I was arrested at the Western Wall a couple decades ago for pulling out a pen on Shabbat because I wanted to journal. Oh, no. You can't create anything on Shabbat. And you mentioned producing things. You don't produce. Well, sometimes I struggle because I love to write songs to Yahweh. But I'm producing something on Shabbat, or I might be tying tzitzit on Shabbat. Would you like to comment?
Yes. Okay, well, first of all, for everyone, that teaching is planned for next week. Okay? Because I wanted to do the intro to the Moedim, and I think I mentioned that at the beginning of the part one anyway. But the plan was, did I mention that? Okay, so the plan was to give the overview first of all of the feasts and then focus it on Shabbat specifically next, okay? Because these are all the CC101 basics. So first basic is to realize there are feasts that include the Shabbat. And then the next thing is to, since it comes up every week, is to answer all those basic questions about how do you keep Sabbath? How do you keep Shabbat? So we will be covering that. And you can still ask your points, and I'll kind of note them down here, but I may not answer them today because I'll answer them in the teaching, next week. But if you have specific questions about Shabbat and Sabbath keeping, you're welcome to email them so that I'll have them before next week for the teaching. Don't send them to me Friday. Send them to me like tomorrow and Monday, so I'll have them in advance. But I've done a Sabbath teaching before. We have the one called Remember the Sabbath Day. I'm going to redo it. I want to address it from a 101 point of view to cover the issues that people have. But my short answer to you about producing is that generally when he's talking about work, it's about work with the effort of producing income, a living. Okay, also the things that when he says this a lot in the scripture, talks about things related to the work of building the tabernacle. So even in their enthusiasm of wanting to build the tabernacle, they needed to stop that work. Okay? So when it talks about kindling a fire, that's the kind of fire he's specifically talking about, a work fire. Okay? For like the smelting, the other things that they were doing and making. Did you see that? The mic went again. But we'll cover those things in the teaching. Okay?
This was my first year keeping Passover and unleavened bread. I was mostly successful. But I had a thought about unleavened bread in particular. You were talking about the spiritual application of the feasts. I personally felt like unleavened bread had a actual practical physical application as well, because I know that in our bodies, an excess of yeast can cause problems. And I just had the thought it was kind of cool, like, well, maybe this is, like, he obviously knows us. He designed us a specific way. So I think it could possibly be like a cleanse that he prescribes for us once a year to cleanse the excess yeast out of our bodies and maybe kind of help out with anything.
That's interesting. So, I think that there might be something to that as well. And by the way, unleavened bread, you know, I have a 3-part teaching we're doing starting next week. I mean, okay, Get Out the Leaven is 3 parts. It was done during unleavened bread, and we'll be posting starting Monday, right? The first look will be on Monday, and then Wednesday will be the full teaching. So that'll be part 1 of Get Out the Leaven. So this teaching series that I just did will not be posting for about 3 weeks, because we have 3 weeks of that to come first, because I didn't want to put that off forever, and I think it's really important stuff for this time period, okay? Especially after the teaching I just did where we're understanding these things.
You read 1 Corinthians 6, 19, the last words are, you are not your own. Mm-hmm. I don't think we can really overemphasize that, and why I say that is I was going through some Psalms this morning, and I was in Psalm 12, and verse 4 says, who have said with our tongue we do mightily, our lips are our own. And who is master over us? I see a tendency today for the self-sovereignty, for people to know more than their teachers, more than their leaders, and to become leaders who are not qualified for leaders. Who's going to tell us what to say? Who's going to tell us what to believe or what to think or anything? And that tendency, I think, is sweeping the Messianic movement today.
Amen.
And so we've got to be on guard for that sort of attitude, because it's becoming very pervasive. Who's master over us? It's our lips. We can say what we want. We can do what we want.
Amen.
And so it's just something to thought.
Amen. You know, Brianna wrote a song that was based on her listening to me in the car talking to somebody on the phone. And I talked about how, you know, you have to get off that throne, that self-sovereign throne, and that we're not our own. And so sing praises to his name. That song has, in the chorus, you know, you have to get off the throne, we are not our own, let Yahweh reign, sing praises to his name. And so it's that whole thing. We can't emphasize enough that you're not your own. I mean, he's bought and paid for you. And so it's hard, though, because the Christian mindset, and I'm not trying to sweep broad. Maybe you experience something different. But generally what I talk to people is that somehow we start thinking that all of this is for us. He did this so that we could have this joyful life and we could do this. And so now it's his good pleasure to give us, but all of that is because it makes him happy. It's still about him. And so somehow we've got to reverse our mindset to realize it's all about him. It's all about him.
So this might be incidental, but when you were talking about the blood over the post for Passover, and that was just one time. You think there's a connection between that and in Deuteronomy where it says to write this on the doorposts of your house and on your gates? I don't know if there's a connection there, but
no, I think that the Jews take that literally. I think that it was more clear that in the V'ahavta, Deuteronomy 6, 5 through 9, that it was meant to be that it should be obvious that your house has this all written all over it, you know? It's like when somebody is going through something emotionally, you can tell somebody, oh, I didn't realize you were upset. They go, I'm not upset. I said, well, it's written all over your face, right? You ever know that line, right? Well, it's written all over your face. Or, whoa, that you're embarrassed. Well, it's written all over your face. You turn red, whatever. Well, they want it to be that it's written all over your house. People can see it, that your house is a house of Torah. Now, actually writing it on the doorpost, probably not a bad idea. You can remember it and remind yourself. And so there are people that have come up with physical ways to do that, like the mezuzah. And people put a mezuzah up on their door, okay? Now, of course, it's a tiny little parchment written in really, 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 really tiny little writing that's called up in this little thing, so you don't get to read it just when you go by your door, but you know what's in there. And so you see it on the doorpost, and it reminds people that your house should be a house of Torah. So I think that's really, a connection there. Okay, live stream.
Okay, from Aubrey and Jeremy Allen. Not being in the land and being in dispersion, why do we keep the first Passover and not the second? It talks about being on a long journey in Numbers 9:1. Okay.
If you are in a congregation and you have a need for the second Passover because you had a reason that you could not be at the first Passover, and only certain reasons would qualify, by the way, then certainly a congregation could hold a second Passover for you. But you have to understand is, and this is a good question, Jeremy and Aubrey, is that the major reasons for needing the second Passover are no longer a point at the moment, which is the touching a dead animal, the things that would make you tameh according to the temple. Because then you couldn't go with your animal to the temple to do the offerings if you were tameh. That's why you see in John, it says that they did not go into to Pilate's palace. They didn't go into the palace lest they would have to take the second Passover, because it would have made them unclean. And so that's an important verse also in I believe it's in John 19 there. Just make sure I'm giving you the right thing. No, John 18 and verse 28 says, they led Yeshua from Caiaphas to the palace, and it was early. They themselves did not go into the palace lest they should be made tameh or defiled, but that they might eat the Passover. So they didn't want to do something that would make it so they would have had to wait a month. Okay? So it's a good question, and as leadership, we're going to see what we can do to address that on a more straightforward basis so that for those who do need one, we have one. And so it's an excellent question that we will address. Thank you for bringing it up. And so leadership, Rabbi Tom, Robert, make note of that as something we need to talk about and address.
What do you recommend for folks who desire to fellowship and that the only thing available to them is a group that refuses leadership, that they just get together to hang out? And is there any significance to the second Passover? I think you covered that.
Okay, well, I covered the second Passover, but let's put it this way. And I could have put it in this teaching, and maybe I should have, but it's going to be in the tithing teaching, which is going to be coming in a few weeks also, so we keep doing all the basics, is that those of you that are on live stream, those of you, no matter where you live, if you are doing the second tithe, the festival tithe, the one for the Shalosh Regalim, then you should, within your year, accumulate enough money, even if you need to get on a plane and fly somewhere, to be able to come to a feast. Okay? I mean, let's face it, if you make $30,000 a year, which I think is probably, within range for most people, at least towards the bottom for most people, that's $3,000 a year to be available for you to get to somewhere on the planet a properly set up feast. So if you'd like to be with us, you'd be able to get to us. Okay? So, but the thing is, we now have to have that whole teaching about tithing that explains the festival tithe that's in Deuteronomy. So let's just make sure that we're going to pay attention. By the way, that teaching is available right now. It's called Tithing Giving for Beginners. It covers it, but I'll be redoing it, okay? But you certainly can listen to that now. So for all of you that are having a fellowship problem, you can at least come to one, if not two or more, of these Shalosh Regalim, okay? And by the way, just as an aside, we had a very long discussion Wednesday after Shavuot dessert about maybe doing Shavuot next year on a cruise. Any takers? And you can use your second tithe for that because it's going to the feast. So just an idea.
So if I gather this correctly, Sabbath, or the Shabbat is a Moed, and observance was to include an oneg in order to finish up with the Shabbat on the first day. And does oneg also have the meaning of joy?
Yeah, the oneg means delight in Hebrew, okay? And most fellowship gatherings, there was the breaking of bread. In other words, people ate together. Okay, there was a fellowship meal. And so certainly when people get together, even if you go to a Jewish synagogue today, okay, on the Shabbat, all right, they will likely have a kiddush and a motzi after the service. They'll have some little finger foods and snacks and things that are there, little pastries or little danishes or something, just something you can have, and the challah and the wine and the, etc. So the idea of when you get together, you break bread together is very much built into these celebrations.
I missed last week. This week it was the
I
Omar
forgive
count covered in detail, and if not, is there a teaching that covers that in depth that I can be referred to?
Was what covered in detail?
The counting of the Omar.
Not in detail. All was covered was that it's something we do. There's not a lot of verses that explains at all anything other than the fact that we're to count 50 days. There are a lot of traditions surrounding it. It is my plan for next year to have something for you guys to do each of the 50 days as part of your count. Okay? I'm also planning to revamp or to at least refresh the Hafta challenge and what were the other ones we did? That was, okay. The Hanukkah challenge, okay, but we won't do it necessarily for Hanukkah, although we can wait and do it again for next Hanukkah. But I want to do some of these challenges where you do something for 30 days or more, and we will have a Omer count challenge, something for you to do for 50 days. Okay? So I just didn't get the time to write it this year, but I had the idea for it, and so I'm hoping to have it ready for next Shavuot for the counting of the Omer.
When fasting, you do not eat or drink, or can you drink water while fasting on the Day of Atonement? And are there any other times that you should fast besides for the Day of Atonement?
Okay. Well, I'm going to do a teaching on fasting. We're going to write that down. I'll make sure I do that. That's one of the basics that we need to get into. Now, the Day of Atonement is really the only day, although there is one other day or two that are by tradition that the Jews have done, but it's the only day scripturally that you would actually fast from everything. No food, no water, no nothing. There are other fasts, which would be more of partial fast compared to that are done. There is a listing in one of the prophets that lists 4 or 5 different fasts that are men's tradition fasts that have to do with when the first temple was destroyed. And so, and Yahweh mentions them, and he mentions them in a positive way. Okay? And so there are other fasts that are in the Bible that you could participate in by tradition. There's only one commanded. However, I can tell you as someone who does study a lot about health, that it is, and it kind of goes along with what you said, as sort of a way of cleansing, it is very healthy for you to fast on a fairly regular basis to give your body a break and a chance to cleanse and detox and reset. So it's very healthy. Now, bear in mind, though, if you are in a health condition where fasting would be dangerous, or you have medication that you need to take that you need to be eating food with, you are absolutely instructed by leadership to eat the food with your medicines or whatever you need to do. If you're diabetic and you have to maintain your blood sugar, if you have whatever it is that is a legitimate health concern, first of all, check with leadership, but you need to eat. Don't put yourself at health risk and go, oh, well, Yahweh wouldn't let something bad happen to me. Well, listen, if you do something foolish, he's still going to let something bad happen to you. He's not going to override foolish. Okay, even with Yahweh, there's no cure for stupid. Okay? I don't know how else to put it, All right, so let's not be foolish. Okay, check with leadership, because then you'll get all frustrated. Well, why did he let this happen to me? Because he wants you to learn the lesson that you have to use wisdom. And you need to go seek leadership to help you with that. Okay, don't be a hero and stand up and be like, okay, whatever. Look, over a certain age, under a certain age, absolutely there are risks to doing the fasting. So you're going to have to be aware of that. Women, if you're breastfeeding, if you're pregnant, there are things that are concerns also with fasting. So let's make sure we're not putting you or others at risk. And so, but you know what? Don't use that as license to have every excuse in the world to eat. Okay? Trust me, I've fasted my entire life on Yom Kippur as a Jew growing up. And, well, I shouldn't say that. When I was really little, I guess they didn't probably make me do that. But certainly from 13 on, and younger than that probably, so that's at least 40 years now I've been doing it. You can do it. It's not that big a deal, okay? It's an emotional, psychological thing that makes it so tough because you think it's going to be a big deal. It really isn't. You'll be amazed that it's easier than you think. But let's put it this way. It's when you're hungry that you're aware that you're fasting, that then you're aware of why you're fasting, that makes you focus vertically. See, so it's really not until you get hungry that it has any use. So it's good that you get hungry. If you don't get hungry at all during the fasting, it didn't really help you very much. You see, it's not about you not eating, that's the thing. It's about you being afflicted and realizing who provides so that you can be blessed and not afflicted. So you purposely afflict yourself to remind you that, hey, all that stuff that I take for granted, He provides.
This question is about the fall feast. Rabbi mentioned, or the fall feast that Rabbi mentioned, if Yeshua has been the atonement for our sins and is now our high priest, why are believers observing Yom Kippur?
Okay, because remember, Yom Kippur is an at-one-ment as a nation, not about individuals. Okay, what Yeshua did was about individuals. What's going to happen later is about the nation. We're not a nation now. We're a body that looks like it jumped on a landmine. We're not there yet. He's going to reconcile the nations. We're looking forward on Yom Kippur to the reconciliation as a nation. Okay? So it's not just about forgiveness of sin. It's about atoning for our lack of cohesiveness as a nation. And we're individuals of a nation. And unfortunately, we're not really good at thinking of ourselves as a nation. We're too selfish for that.
Wants to know if it's common for most of us to go through heavy spiritual attacks and trials just before the feast, and should we expect them to get worse as we get closer to Yeshua's return?
I would definitely expect them to happen. And anybody who's been keeping the feast for a few years knows that they do. It's kind of, but of course, when you know it's going to happen, it doesn't actually hit you as bad because you're like, oh, this is happening. And then you go, wait a minute, next month is Passover. Or wait a minute, next month is Sukkot. So you kind of know these things are coming because, the adversary likes to stir things up right around the time that you're trying to get excited about something, get all joyful, and wants to just derail you from all of that and get you discouraged and frustrated and make you think you won't be able to go or whatever it is. So that's common. Would they get worse right before He comes? Maybe. I mean, there certainly is some logic to that possibility. I don't know that there's a verse that tells me that, but that certainly wouldn't surprise me. But just realize that they will come. Okay? They will come. Because what is He trying to do? He's trying to disturb your peace and steal your joy. Okay? And so when are you most at peace and most joyful? Around the feasts. So especially if He's going to make you feel like you're not going to be able to go. That's where He's going to try to really win. Try to let something happen or cause something to happen in your life that's going to make you feel like now I can't go. And so if something like that happens, call us so we could talk to you and make sure that if there's any way possible, you can still go. Okay? And not just try to do that on your own strength without help.
Besides for preparing financially for the cost and travel and for the accommodations, etc. for the feast, what else are we to plan for, to bring, and to whom are we to give it to? I believe that's in correlation with Deuteronomy 16:16, and you had mentioned about planning ahead to bring that gift.
Okay. When I do the tithing teaching, we'll understand that you can use that second tithe for whatever your heart desires in celebrating the feast. Okay? Now I'm going to caution you to say, as long as it's feasting related. In other words, that's not the time that you necessarily have to go buy something that has nothing to do with the feasts. But if you wanted to buy some new clothes that you could wear at the feast so you can celebrate before him, if you wanted to go and have some nicer meals, you can do that to celebrate before him. I mean, there's things that are feast related that are not just traveling to and from. Okay? Maybe you have enough tithes so you can buy yourself a new tent. Maybe you have enough tithes so you can do. Now, as far as coming and preparing, the offering that you're putting is putting it in the offering box. That's your offering like you would put your tithes. You're giving an offering to the ministry, which is really giving it to him. And so you're coming with that to put in the offering box. Okay, so you're preparing for that. And by the way, we didn't talk about it here, but as part of the tithing teaching, the tithing cycle ends with Shemini Atzeret, and you start again after that. So whatever you have left from that second tithe, that also goes in at Shemini Atzeret, because you start at 0 each year. The reason is because if you didn't, you'd stop doing it because you'd accumulate an excess, and then you'd get lazy about actually doing it. Because after all, I've got all this excess. Why do I need to keep putting more aside? I've got plenty from last year I didn't use. He doesn't want you to do that. He wants you to do these things.
Could you explain in Deuteronomy 16 not to come empty-handed? Do they mean money, and what kind of offering do they mean?
Today, it would be money. No. Okay, no, we're not going to have you bring your cows or your goats or your chickens or grains or corn or wheat or whatever you're going to bring. No, it would be something. Now, by the way, in Deuteronomy it says that they would normally bring that other stuff, but if the journey is too far, I believe all of this is from chapter 15 or 14, and so if the journey is too far, then you would convert it to money, okay? So it's 14, all right? So I knew where it was on the right-hand part of the page over here. So, it says, but when the way is too long for you so that you're not able to bring the tithe, or when the place where Yahweh is chosen to put his name is too far from you, then you shall give it in silver. I've got some silver. So you can buy some of these and give it in these. But you could just use money, okay? You could just use money.